Hey everyone, Chase Elleby and Joel Williams with Williams Elleby. This is week 45 in our series of 52 weeks of personal injury. It's just flying by. Time flies when you're having fun. So today we're going to talk about insurance and your auto insurance specifically. So I'm going to give you guys a second, get out your phones, pull out your deck page because we're going to do a deep dive into coverage. So Joel, to start this off, let's talk about, I think, the most important, and that's liability coverage. So if I go pull up my deck page and I see liability coverage, what does it mean? What should it say? And what do I need to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, this sounds like a lot of fun. No, seriously. All right, liability coverage. So this is coverage that most people think about first when they buy car insurance. This is coverage that protects you in the event that you cause a wreck and damage someone else's property or hurt them. So what you're going to see, and keep in mind that policies have different requirements in different states as far as limits and all that goes. So some of what we give you today is going to be sort of limited to Georgia.
State specific.
Yeah, but also some of these principles may cross state borders and apply in different states. But we're in Georgia, so we're going to talk to you about the requirements of Georgia. So basically, in order to legally drive on the road, you have to have what we call 25-50 coverage, which means that you have to have $25,000 of coverage to cover damage you cause to another person or their property, and 50 to cover the wreck. So for example, if you get in a wreck and you hurt 3 people, then the most any one person, if you have minimum limits 25-50, the most any one person can get is $25,000. However, if 3 people are hurt, your insurance company may pay up to 50, but no more than 25 for one person.
Right, so it's 50 for the whole wreck.
That's right.
The way I like to explain it.
Yeah. So I would just say, if you're looking at your policy and it says 25-50 for bodily injury coverage, if you can possibly afford it, increase that amount. Because if you hit somebody and they go to the emergency room and have 3 or 4 CT scans done, that your policy's gone right there. So you could personally be liable for anything in excess of your policy limits. So at a minimum, call your insurance agent and at least get a quote to see what the premiums would be for you if you got a 100-300 policy. If you have a lot of assets, if you've got $1 million sitting in the bank, then you're going to need more than the 100-300. But I would say probably 75 to 80% of the cases we see, 100-300 policy would be sufficient.
Right.
But you never know. I mean, it could be where you hurt somebody and they're hospitalized for 6 months or they're paralyzed. But in those, those are rare situations. So I think if at all possible, at least get a 100-300 policy to protect yourself.
Yeah, and I think the property damage portion of the liability coverage is important as well. So like Joel was saying, like in Georgia, for instance, if you look at your deck page, you'll see the 25,000, the 50,000, then you'll see the 25,000 right after that, or right below it, depending on who the insurance carrier is. And that's the amount you have to pay, or your insurance rather is going to pay for any property damage that you might cause. So if you're in a multiple vehicle car wreck where you might ping pong off 4 or 5 cars and they're all totaled, you're only going to have 25,000 to try to cover all the property damage that you may have caused. So I think, again, it goes back to what you can afford and what makes the most sense for your situation, but just be aware of what the ramifications are for that type of coverage that you elect. And also too, with liability, I think it's important if you get to the higher limits is to look in what's called an umbrella policy. And an umbrella policy on the liability side is like an umbrella, right? It covers everything that may happen above the liability limits for your vehicle. So some insurance companies in Georgia, for instance, you have to have a certain amount of liability coverage in order to qualify for that umbrella coverage, right? So say you have $250,000 of liability, and then on top of that, you can get $1 million or $2 million of umbrella coverage, which would cover in excess of what the auto coverage is. So that's another thing to look out for.
Yeah, and those umbrella policies, honestly, are usually the cheapest insurance you can buy dollar for dollar, because the insurance companies know that the chances of you causing a wreck, that where the damages are $2 or $3, $4, $5 million are much smaller than the chances of you causing a wreck where somebody's got $5,000 of damages. So they actually charge you more for the coverage at the lower amounts than they do for so the coverage for that first $25,000, dollar for dollar, is more expensive than the coverage if you get $1 million policy between, say, 900 and $1 million. You're paying more for that coverage because the likelihood of being in a small wreck is greater than the likelihood of you being in a catastrophic wreck.
Right.
So the next thing is, let's see, if I'm going down a deck page, probably UM.
Right. So I was, kind of shift it from coverage that you purchase to protect, others if you're responsible. Now let's kind of shift to coverage you purchase to protect yourself.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that'd be two categories. You'd have medical payments coverage and you have uninsured motorist coverage. So I'll talk about uninsured motorist coverage because I think honestly that's the most important, and I think I don't even know how to put a percentage on it, but 90% of our clients who come to us have no clue what uninsured motorist coverage is. And most of the time, they're upset to find out they either didn't have enough or didn't have any, and very rarely are they pleasantly surprised to find out that they have sufficient uninsured motorist coverage. So you might hear it called UM, uninsured motorist coverage, underinsured motorist coverage, UIM. It's all the same, right? Well, in Georgia at least. So uninsured motorist coverage protects you in a situation where either the person who caused the wreck isn't insured, or if they don't have enough coverage to compensate you for your injuries, right? So Joel talked earlier about there being, $25,000 is the state minimum for liability. If you go to the emergency room and have a handful of CT scans, your ER bill alone might be $30,000. Well, the $25,000 from the liability insurance company isn't going to fully compensate you for your injuries, so then you would look to the uninsured motorist, okay? Most of the time, the uninsured motorist coverage is going to match what your liability coverage is. Okay, in Georgia, you have to specifically select if you want your uninsured motorist coverage to be less than what your actual liability coverage is, right? So what does that mean? Let's say you have that 100, 300 liability policy that we recommend having at a minimum. If you get uninsured motorist coverage at say $25,000 or $50,000, you have to actually go and check the box and select it. Now, sometimes your insurance agent probably checks the box for you and says, hey, this is what you want. Go ahead, sign here, sign there. But you really need to understand what it is that you're selecting. I always encourage everyone to have at least, if you have 100 in liability, have at least 100 in uninsured motorist coverage, and make sure that uninsured motorist coverage is add-on coverage, not reduced by. And so what add-on means, this is a great dissertation on fun insurance stuff, what add-on means is that, I know, right? Snooze break. You just add it on top of however much liability coverage there is available. And this can seriously be a lifesaver to people who have been in really bad wrecks, and the person who caused the wreck just has the state minimum, right? I've had clients that have had $500,000 in uninsured motorist coverage where they've been severely injured and the person who caused the wreck only had $25,000. And it's made a huge difference in their lives just to have that coverage. And going back to what we talked about, just getting a quote and finding out what the cost is going to be, it's generally not that expensive for the benefit you get when you have uninsured motorist coverage.
Yep, and that's kind of the exception to the rule. It's
right.
Much more common for us to see situations where somebody's got, the at-fault driver has minimum limits coverage, and then our client has difference in limits, minimum limits UM,
right.
or they rejected UM outright, and then they have medical bills of $100,000, $200,000 with only $25,000 of coverage.
Right, and another important thing for the UM coverage as well is, let's say you have a nice expensive car. I've seen it where people have the great liability policy. They got that $100,000 per person, $300,000 per wreck, plus $100,000 in property damage if they hit someone. But then you look at their uninsured motorist coverage and they've got $25,000 of reduced by uninsured motorist coverage for the property damage.
For a Porsche.
For a Porsche, right. So what does that mean? That means you're driving a car that, let's say it's a $75,000 car. Well, if somebody hits you that doesn't have health insurance, if somebody that hits you doesn't have auto insurance, your uninsured motorist coverage is going to kick in, but oh wait, I only have $25,000 of property damage for uninsured motorists, and I'm driving a $75,000 car.
Yeah.
That means your insurance company is only going to pay you $25,000 for the car that's totaled. That $50,000 you're going to have to come up with, and hopefully you don't owe, the difference, or you have gap coverage like we talked about before.
Yeah.
But I think
if you're not going to go cheap on the car, don't go cheap on the insurance.
Yeah, but I think that's one thing that people just don't realize. If you have an expensive car, look to see what your uninsured motorist property damage coverage is, because it needs to be more than what your car is worth.
Yeah,
so.
That's right. So the next kind of coverage that Chase mentioned earlier is medical payments coverage. In Georgia, it's called medical payments coverage. Some states, it's called PIP. They're very similar. But what medical payments coverage does is it covers you regardless of whether the wreck is your fault or whether it's somebody else's fault, but you can use that coverage to pay your medical bills. Usually we see those limits be substantially lower than liability or UM coverage.
Right.
We'll see them $1,000, $2,000. Sometimes we've seen them as high as $25,000 or $50,000, but that's pretty rare. But if you have medical payments coverage and your medical bills are low, or if you have health insurance and you have deductibles or copays that you're paying along with that, you can use your medical payments coverage to help offset some of your out-of-pocket expenses, which can come in really handy, especially if your personal injury claim ends up taking longer than you expect.
Right, so MedPay can basically be a supplement if you have health insurance. So if you have health insurance and you get in a car wreck, having $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 in MedPay is probably sufficient, because you can use that to help with the copays and deductibles. If you don't have health insurance, you can get medical payments coverage, which again, that's relatively inexpensive, so that if you are in a wreck, or you can get you can get high MedPay limits if you don't have health insurance. So that way, if you get in a car wreck and say you have to go to the emergency room, broken bones, or whatever it might be, you can have that $25,000 or even $50,000 in medical payments coverage to cover you for the injuries that you sustain in a car wreck. So that's another thing just to look at, that a lot of people don't really know what it is or know if they haven't. So many clients will ask, well, do you have medical payments coverage? You're like, huh? Well, who's that? Never heard of her. Yeah. And you go and you look at the deck page, and it's usually $1,000 to $2,000 or not, no MedPay at all. So,
yep.
Yeah.
Any other parts of the, you want to talk about windshield crack coverage or flat tire coverage? Or?
No, I just think it's important. I had a friend of mine who, his wife owned a insurance agency, still owns an insurance agency, and he said to me that it's very important, every 2 years, just shop your insurance around to find out the best rates from all the major carriers.
Yeah.
And just really talk to your agent to find out what it is that's actually covered, and what each coverage, like how that coverage would play out in any specific scenario, because that typically doesn't happen at all. But I think it's extremely important to know what it is that you're buying, because auto insurance, quite frankly, it's pretty expensive. So you need to know what you're paying for. Yeah. But I think we've kind of hit the basics. So.
Yeah, and I was on that end, just avoid the temptation to fall into brand loyalty, because
true.
Generally, if you stay with the same insurance company for 10, 20, 30 years, you're going to end up at some point paying more than you need to. So like Chase was saying, just go out and look every 2 or 3 years and compare State Farm, Progressive, AmFam, whoever's in your area that has a good reputation. Get quotes from all of them and see what the same coverage from each company would cost. And then consider going with the lowest cost option, and then do it again 2 or 3 years from now, and just save yourself that money if you have the chance to.
Oh, for sure. And I can promise you, on the claims side, they're not going to care if you've been with that insurance company for 2 weeks or 200 years.
Nope.
They're going to treat you exactly the same. So yeah, always shop around. You can have brand loyalty, but these big insurance companies don't have customer loyalty for the most part,
right?
Because they're just so large. But yeah, so always shop around.
Your agent might go out of his or her way to really try to help you out, but they are sort of constrained by what big State Farm or big Allstate or big Progressive allows them to do.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for week 45. If this video has been helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. If you were snoring like I was during the video, just click right along and go to the next one, or you're probably already out of here by now. But or subscribe to our page. We sure would appreciate that. And otherwise, we will see you next week for video number 46.